Just $4.50. That is the only thing stopping a man with 4 NBA championships and a massive fortune. It is 1:17 a.m. at a quiet toll booth outside Indianapolis. Shaquille O'Neal is driving alone to find some quiet. He wants to escape the noise of his million-dollar empire. Suddenly, he gets stuck at a closed gate. The worker is Nia, a night shift employee with a $22,400 student debt and a high risk of losing her job. Two people with heavy, invisible burdens now face each other through a narrow window. How will Nia's choice to bypass a cold rule that night start a journey of empathy and change their fates? The fog outside Booth 4 was thick that night. It rolled across the highway like smoke from a slow fire. Booth 4 sat alone near the edge of Indianapolis. The world outside felt far away and forgotten. Inside the tiny cabin, barely wider than a closet, an old electric heater buzzed and clicked. The sound was dry and tired, just like the woman sitting beside it. Nia Brooks was 35 years old. She wore a faded blue uniform sweater with thin cuffs from years of washing. Her hands were dry and cracked from the cold air. She typed numbers into an old Casio calculator. Half the screen had already lost its glow. Worn paper receipts sat stacked in a folder beside her keyboard. They smelled like damp cardboard and old ink. Outside the cracked window, cold asphalt and exhaust drifted into the booth. Nia was fighting sleep with everything she had. Her eyes felt heavy, almost too heavy to hold open. She had worked this night shift for 2 long years. Her bank account held exactly $14.12 that night. Her rent was $850, due again in 5 short days. Her student loan balance sat at $22,400, never shrinking, only waiting. Every number lived in her head at once. She could not escape them, not even for a single minute. She had taken this job right after her father got sick, back when steady income mattered more than comfort or sleep. The pay was small, but the hours fit around her online classes during the day. Most nights passed quietly, just her, the heater, and a stack of unfinished homework waiting in the corner. She told herself every single shift was simply one more step closer to the finish line. Outside, a single highway light flickered above the empty lane. Most cars had stopped passing through hours ago. The night shift always felt the longest near this exact hour, somewhere between deep sleep and early sunrise. Nia kept a small photo taped near her keyboard. It showed her in a graduation gown from years earlier, a reminder of the goals still waiting ahead. She glanced at it now, then back at her tired reflection in the dark window glass. A low engine sound broke through the silence outside. A massive black SUV rolled slowly toward the closed gate. The Easy Pass scanner above the booth let out 3 sharp beeps. They sounded cold, almost like a warning siren. The little screen flashed bright red letters. Account error. The yellow and black striped gate stayed locked tight across the lane. The driver's window slid down slowly. Under the dull yellow light of the booth, a huge face appeared. It belonged to Shaquille O'Neal, though Nia did not know that yet. The cabin felt smaller than ever beside him. He stood 7 feet 1 inch tall, folded behind the wheel like a man stuffed into a tiny box. His shoulders curled inward on purpose. He leaned down low toward the small window, trying his best not to look like a threat to the tired woman inside. His voice came out deep, slow, and gentle. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said softly. "My payment device seems to be acting up tonight. And I don't have any cash on me right now." Nia blinked at her screen one more time. The same message kept repeating itself. Payment required. For $50. No backup card option appeared anywhere on her system. She glanced up at the giant man waiting outside her window. He looked tired and almost embarrassed, like a kid who forgot his lunch money at home. Shaq reached into the glove box first. Then he pulled out his own wallet. Inside sat thick black cards, the kind that opened doors most people never even saw in their lives. But this old booth only accepted exact cash, or a working Easy Pass account. None of his fancy cards meant anything here tonight. Not at booth 4. He checked his coat pockets next, then the cup holders between the seats, hoping for a stray coin rolling around somewhere. Nothing turned up. He even checked the floor mats briefly, feeling almost silly doing it. A man with more money than most small towns combined, searching his own car for spare change at 1 in the morning. The thought alone almost made him laugh out loud. He let out a quiet laugh, mostly aimed at himself. I canceled my flight out of Columbus, he explained. Wanted to drive instead and clear my head a little. His voice dropped even lower. Things have been loud lately. Too loud, honestly, for too long. He stared briefly at the fogged-up windshield in front of him. The past few months had felt heavier than usual, full of business meetings, old arguments, and quiet regrets he rarely spoke about out loud. Driving alone at night had become one of the few moments he could actually hear his own thoughts. Out here, no one recognized the slow shape behind the wheel. Out here, he was just another tired man stuck at a gate. He often thought about how different his life had become since his playing days ended. Cameras followed him less now, but expectations followed him everywhere he went. People assumed a man his size, with his history, never struggled with anything small. They rarely guessed that small moments, like a broken card reader at midnight, could still catch him off guard. Nia's screen blinked again with the same red warning. Payment required for $50. No card reader worked at all. No emergency option appeared on her end either. She watched him search his coat pockets one more time, hoping for a stray dollar. That never showed up. The cold night pressed in close around them both. She knew the station rule by heart, word for word. If a car could not pay, she had to send it to the emergency lane. Then she had to call highway patrol right away. They would write a $150 ticket on the spot. The entire process could take 2 hours, sometimes longer, in freezing weather. It was a rule built for machines, never for real people standing in the cold. A small camera blinked from the corner of the station roof. It pointed straight down at Booth 4, watching everything. That camera belonged to Arthur Pendleton, the strict station manager. Arthur followed every single rule like it was scripture handed down from above. Just last week, he had sent Nia an official written warning. Her crime that night had been letting an elderly woman pass for free during a bad storm. That warning still sat folded inside her locker, a small piece of paper that somehow felt much heavier than it looked. Arthur had explained, in calm and measured words, that exceptions led to chaos, and chaos led to lost revenue for the state. He never raised his voice when he said things like that. He never needed to. His calm tone made the threat feel even colder than shouting ever could. One more mistake now, and she would lose everything she had built. Her job, her health coverage, the state loan guarantee tied directly to her current job status. She stared hard at the blinking screen, her hands shaking slightly above the keyboard. The seconds stretched out long and heavy, like minutes pretending to be hours. Then Shaq noticed something small on her desk. A thick textbook sat in the corner, its cover bent and soft from constant use. The title read, Principles of Financial Accounting. He studied it for a moment, then looked back into her tired eyes. He did not bring up the toll fee again. Instead, he asked her something much simpler. What are you studying for? His voice sounded warm, never nosy, just genuinely curious about her. Nia hesitated for a second before answering. Accounting, she said quietly. I want to become a CPA. I'm close. Real close now. Her voice cracked just slightly on that last word. Shaq nodded slowly, something flickering behind his eyes. Something about her tired face reminded him of someone from long ago. His mother, Lucille, used to stand at corner stores back in Newark, counting coins from a small worn purse. People waiting behind her in line would sigh loudly and roll their eyes at the delay. She never once flinched at their impatience. She just kept counting, slow and steady, until she finally had enough for milk. He remembered standing beside his mother, as a boy, embarrassed at first by the slow counting and the impatient stares from strangers. Over time, that embarrassment turned into something else entirely. He learned to admire her instead, the way she refused to rush or apologize for being short on cash that week. She taught him, without ever saying it directly, that dignity had nothing to do with money in your pocket. He carried that quiet lesson with him into every part of his life, long after she was gone. My mom used to count pennies just like that, he told her. People stared at her like she was wasting their precious time. She never let any of that stop her. He paused for a long moment. Don't let this cold little booth stop you either. I've known people who started in much darker places than this one. Nia looked at him for a long, quiet moment. Two strangers, both carrying weight no one else could see, stood close together under one flickering light. The thick fog outside seemed to soften just a little bit, as if it were listening too. She glanced one more time at the blinking camera in the corner of the booth. Her heart pounded hard and fast against her ribs. She thought about Arthur, sitting somewhere warm right now, watching every camera feed like a hawk circling its prey. Then she thought about this stranger, freezing out there for $4.50 because of one broken machine. For a moment, she thought about her own mother too, back home in a small town outside the city. Her mother always said pride and hunger could not share the same plate for long. Nia had carried that lesson with her every single day since leaving home. She had skipped meals before. She had walked to work in the rain to save bus fare. She knew exactly what it felt like to stand outside, cold and stuck, waiting for someone to show a little mercy. She glanced once more at the textbook sitting on her desk, its corners soft and worn from constant studying. She thought about every late night spent memorizing tax codes after a full shift here. She thought about how close she finally was to finishing after years of real sacrifice. None of that, she realized, gave her the right to be cold towards someone else stuck out here in the dark. She made her choice in that single, quiet second. Her fingers moved fast across the worn keyboard. She typed in a special override code, the kind reserved strictly for emergency vehicles during real disasters. It was never meant for a moment like this one. She knew that fact completely. She typed it anyway, without looking back. Her heart pounded the whole time, loud in her own ears, almost drowning out the heater's steady hum. Part of her expected an alarm to sound, some flashing light warning her to stop before it was too late. Nothing happened except the quiet click of the system accepting her entry. The screen changed, from red to a calm, steady green. She grabbed a yellow paper slip from a thin pad nearby. She wrote down the SUV's license plate carefully in neat handwriting. She signed her own full name at the very bottom of the page. It stood as proof of exactly what she had done, and proof she would stand firmly behind it. She pressed the manual release button hard with her thumb. The old gate groaned upward, its chains rattling loudly in the cold night air. It was a small, tired sound, but it felt enormous in that frozen moment. It felt, to her, like a door opening somewhere far bigger than this highway. Shaq looked at her then, his eyes soft and full of real gratitude. "Thank you, Nia," he said quietly, reading her name straight off her uniform tag. Hearing her own name spoken gently by a stranger felt heavier than she expected it to feel. The SUV rolled forward slowly and disappeared into the thick fog ahead. Red taillights faded out, then vanished completely from view. Nia sat alone again inside her tiny booth, the old heater humming weakly beside her. She knew sunrise would not be kind to her at all, but for one short moment, the cold did not feel quite as sharp as before. Morning came fast, and it came angry. By 6:15 a.m., Arthur Pendleton was already sitting inside his office. A printed transaction log lay flat on his desk, one line marked bright red. The system had flagged an emergency vehicle override used overnight at booth 4. He called Nia into his office before she could even remove her coat. The small room smelled like burnt coffee from a cheap machine sitting in the corner. Arthur sat behind his desk, fingers tapping once, then twice, against the printed paper in front of him. He slid the yellow receipt slowly across the desk toward her. His voice stayed calm and almost pleasant, but every single word landed like a slap across her face. "Miss Brooks, I assume you can read just fine," he said. "This marks the second time you've decided to run your own little charity using state funds." Nia kept her voice steady and clear despite her racing heart. "There was a man stuck at the gate," she explained. "His payment system had completely failed him. I made a judgment call in the moment." She did not raise her voice once. She did not look away from him either. Arthur leaned back in his chair, studying her for a long moment before speaking again. "You always have a reasonable explanation, don't you?" he said quietly. "An old woman last month. A stranded driver this time. Tomorrow it could be anyone with a sad enough story." He tapped the receipt once with his finger. "Rules exist precisely because everyone thinks their exception is the special one." He waited, almost daring her to argue back, but Nia only stayed silent and let him finish. Arthur did not blink at her answer. Judgment calls aren't part of your job, he said flatly. Rules are your only job here. He reached for a fresh form already half filled out and waiting. You're suspended, effective immediately, without any pay. He signed his own name, with one quick, practiced motion. I'll be sending a full report to corporate up in Chicago. They will review your loan guarantee status, as well, starting today. The words landed like cold stones dropping into Nia's stomach. She had heard threats from him before many times. This one felt completely different. Final, with no room left for appeal. She walked out of that small office holding her chin up high, even as her hands trembled quietly at her sides. A few co-workers glanced up from their own desks as she passed through the hallway. No one said a word to her. Everyone at the station knew how Arthur operated, and no one wanted to risk his attention falling on them next. Nia kept walking, eyes forward, refusing to let her face show the panic building underneath her calm expression. By the time she reached her car in the empty parking lot, the morning sun had barely started to rise over the highway. She sat behind the wheel for a moment, hands resting on her lap, trying to steady her breathing before driving home. The radio in her car stayed off the entire ride. She wanted silence, not noise, not even a familiar song. Every red light along the way felt like another small reminder. Her plans could unravel over something as small as a closed gate and $4.50. Her apartment that morning felt smaller than she remembered it being. It sat on the east side of the city, inside a building, with thin walls and a leaking kitchen faucet. Stacks of old accounting notes covered her small kitchen table completely. A half-empty can of soup sat cold beside her laptop screen. Her phone buzzed sharply on the counter. An automatic text from her loan servicer reminded her, again, of the $22,400 balance still sitting there. Without her job, she could not possibly cover next semester's tuition bill. Expulsion was no longer just a quiet fear in her mind. It was quickly becoming a hard fact. Her pride would not let her call the man from the toll booth, even now. She did not even know his real name yet. Reaching out to beg for help felt completely impossible to her. Instead, she packed her worn accounting textbook into a small cardboard box. She told herself this break was only temporary. Maybe she would go home for a while, take a factory job, save money, and try again later. Maybe. She sat on the edge of her bed for a long while that night, staring at the box on the floor. 3 semesters of work sat folded inside that small space, along with every late night spent studying after her shift ended. She thought briefly about calling her mother, then decided against it. She did not want to hear worry in her mother's voice. Not yet, not until she had a real plan in place. Sleep came slowly, and it brought no comfort with it. Her phone sat silent on the nightstand the rest of that evening. No messages came from coworkers checking in. No calls came from anyone offering advice or comfort. She had built her life around independence for so long that asking for help now felt like admitting some kind of defeat. She pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders and stared at the ceiling until exhaustion finally won. The next day brought even worse news than before. An email arrived directly from her school's financial office. Her academic account had been fully frozen, effective immediately. Her sponsor organization, the Highway Corporation, had pulled their disciplinary guarantee following Arthur's official report. She went to the financial aid office in person, hoping someone there might actually listen to her. A tired administrator behind the counter slowly shook her head at Nia's request. "I'm very sorry," the woman said gently. "Without that guarantee on file, there's nothing I can approve for you today. Policy is policy here." Nia tried explaining the situation calmly, describing 2 years of perfect attendance and strong grades. The administrator nodded sympathetically, but kept repeating the same line about policy. There was nothing personal in her refusal, just an exhausted system following its own rigid script. Nia thanked her quietly and turned to leave, feeling smaller with every step toward the door. Nia walked back outside, into a cold, steady afternoon rain. She stood alone under a heavy gray sky, watching students rush past her with umbrellas and full backpacks. For the very first time in years, She let herself believe the dream might really be over now. The thoughts sat heavy in her chest, like a stone she simply could not put down anywhere. She walked slowly back to her car, rain soaking through her thin jacket along the way. She did not cry, not yet. She had learned long ago that crying rarely solved anything practical. Instead, she sat behind the wheel for several minutes, engine off, simply watching raindrops slide down the windshield one by one. Somewhere out there, she thought bitterly, a rich stranger was probably already forgetting about a $4 toll. He had probably forgotten the woman who helped him that night too. She thought about every sacrifice that had brought her this far. The double shifts, the skipped meals, the years of telling herself one more semester, just one more, and everything would finally pay off. Sitting there in the rain, none of those sacrifices felt like they mattered anymore. She started the engine eventually, not because she felt ready, but because staying still any longer felt unbearable. Far away in Orlando, Florida, life moved at a completely different pace that week. Shaq sat inside a large office filled with old trophies and faded photographs. His assistant, Robert, sorted quietly through a tall stack of mail at a side desk nearby. Most of it was routine paperwork. Bills, event invitations, requests for public appearances. Robert had worked for Shaq for nearly 6 years by then, long enough to know which letters needed urgent attention and which ones could wait. He usually sorted through everything alone, only bringing the important items into the main office. That particular morning, something about the small government envelope felt different enough to mention right away. He had learned, over the years, to trust those small instincts, even when nothing on paper seemed urgent at first glance. One small envelope caught Robert's attention immediately. It came from the Indiana Department of Transportation, stamped and official. Inside sat a small invoice for $4.50, plus a $15 late fee attached. A printed note explained that an employee had improperly processed an exemption code overnight. Robert handed the paper over without giving it much thought at all. Shaq read the short note slowly, his expression shifting as the memory came rushing back to him. He remembered the tired, determined eyes behind that small booth window. He remembered the worn, soft-cover textbook sitting on her cluttered desk. He set his coffee cup down gently on the table beside him. His voice stayed calm, but real weight sat underneath every word. "Robert," he said, "I need you to find out exactly what happened to that woman at booth for that night." Robert nodded once and got straight to work without delay. Within just a few hours, he had pulled together a clear picture using contacts inside state administration offices. The file glowing on his screen told a hard, painful story. Nia Brooks, suspended without any pay at all. A $22,400 student loan now sitting in real danger. A scholarship guarantee pulled completely because of one small act of late-night kindness. Shaq read every line on that file twice, slowly. Anger rose inside him, quiet but sharp as a blade. Not anger at Nia, never at her. Anger at a cold system that punished simple decency and rewarded rigid, heartless rules instead. He wanted to help her immediately, without waiting another single day. But he also understood something important about pride and dignity. If he simply mailed her a large check out of nowhere, it might feel like charity to her. It could easily hurt the very pride that had impressed him so much that night. He thought back to all the years after his playing career ended, all the quiet moments when people assumed money could fix anything broken. Money could pay a bill. It could not always repair what a system like this one had damaged. He wanted to fix both things at once, the bill and the damage, without making her feel small in the process. So he chose a different, quieter path forward. No press conference. No public statement of any kind. Instead, he worked quietly through his own education foundation. The plan slowly took shape, a $500,000 scholarship fund aimed directly at toll workers across the entire state of Indiana. Back in Indianapolis, Arthur Pendleton sat comfortably at his desk, feeling rather pleased with himself that morning. His office phone rang sharply, breaking the quiet around him. It was the corporate office calling directly from Chicago. The voice on the other end sounded nervous, almost shaky with tension. The regional director demanded that Arthur fix the entire Nia Brooks situation immediately, with absolutely no further delay allowed. Arthur tried asking questions, wanting to understand exactly what had gone wrong overnight. The director cut him off sharply, repeating only that the company's legal team had gotten directly involved. Arthur had never heard panic in that man's voice before, not in all his years working for the corporation. Something about this case had clearly traveled far higher up the chain than any toll violation usually did. Confused and suddenly uneasy, Arthur barely had time to respond before his office door swung open. A lawyer walked calmly into the room, composed and quiet, carrying a single thin folder under one arm. Inside sat a personal check, signed clearly by Shaquille O'Neal himself. The exact amount read $4.50, plus the $15 late fine attached. Behind that small check sat a second, much longer document. It outlined a full scholarship program built specifically for night shift highway workers across all of Indiana. The terms inside were specific, firm, and impossible to argue with. Nia Brooks would become the very first recipient, with absolutely no conditions attached to her award. All disciplinary action filed against her would be reversed immediately and completely. And Arthur Pendleton himself would write her a sincere, personal letter of apology by hand. The lawyer explained each term clearly, his voice flat and professional, leaving no room for negotiation of any kind. He mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that the foundation expected a written confirmation within 24 hours. Arthur listened in silence, his usual confidence nowhere to be found in that moment. Somewhere down the hall, employees who had once feared his strict rules now watched him. They watched through the office window, wondering what had brought him this low. Arthur read through the papers twice, his face slowly turning pale as the truth settled in. The man he had dismissed as just another careless driver turned out to hold far more power than his entire chain of command combined. His confidence drained right out of him in total, heavy silence. There was simply no argument left for him to make. The lawyer waited patiently, saying nothing further, letting the documents speak for themselves. Arthur's hands shook slightly as he signed the acknowledgement form placed in front of him. He thought briefly about the warning email he had once sent Nia over an elderly woman crossing for free. That memory now felt small and foolish compared to the weight sitting on his desk. He nodded once, quietly, and that was the end of any argument he might have raised. A few days later, Nia walked back into that same toll station office, bracing herself for the worst. She expected a final termination letter, maybe one last paycheck waiting on the desk. Instead, Arthur stood there waiting, his hands trembling slightly, as he held out a thick folder toward her. Inside sat a handwritten letter and an official scholarship certificate worth $22,400, fully covering her remaining tuition costs. Arthur looked at her directly, his voice low and unusually quiet. "I owe you an apology," he said carefully. "A real one, not just words on paper. I was wrong about you from the start." The sentence came out stiff and awkward, but it sounded completely honest. Nia opened the handwritten letter slowly, her fingers shaking just slightly. The handwriting was plain and simple, nothing at all like she expected from someone so famous. "Thank you for not letting me sit in my car at midnight. Over $4.50, it read. "I've sat in worse places for far worse reasons, more than once in my life. Go finish what you started. You earned every bit of this." Warm tears slid slowly down her cheeks and landed softly on the certificate in her trembling hands. For the first time in many long months, she felt something close to real peace settle inside her chest. Her dignity, the one thing she had refused to give up through every hard moment, had finally been seen and fully respected. She thought back to that foggy night at Booth 4, how small the decision had felt in the moment. A few seconds of courage, a yellow slip of paper, and her own signature scrawled at the bottom. She never imagined it would lead anywhere beyond a possible write-up or a quiet thank you. Standing there now, holding proof that kindness had actually mattered, she felt something new rise inside her. She allowed herself to feel proud instead of afraid for the first time in a long while. The fear that once filled every corner of her mind had finally made room for something steadier. 3 full years passed quietly after that strange winter night. Nia Brooks graduated at the very top of her accounting class, exactly as she had once dreamed. She took a job as finance director at a nonprofit organization in Indianapolis, helping low-income Black families build stable, hopeful futures for themselves. The same quiet determination that once kept her awake inside booth for now powered every single meeting she walked into with confidence. Her days looked nothing like those long, cold nights at the toll booth anymore. She arrived each morning to a small office, with sunlight pouring through real windows. It was a far cry from the dim yellow bulb that once lit her tiny cabin. Coworkers respected her steady judgment, often asking her to review budgets and grant proposals before anyone else saw them. She never forgot what it felt like to sit on the other side of a closed door. She remembered waiting for someone to finally say yes. That memory shaped the way she treated every family who walked through her office seeking help. The old toll station changed, as well, slowly but surely, over those same 3 years. Arthur, forced to rethink his old habits and rigid thinking, helped introduce a brand new policy called the Grace Protocol. Under this new rule, drivers facing sudden payment trouble during real emergencies got a full 48 hours. They could settle their bills safely online, instead of facing tickets and patrol cars on the spot. Nia kept a small framed copy of Shaq's handwritten letter on her office desk, tucked beside a new photo of her own graduation day. Coworkers sometimes asked about the story behind it, and she would simply smile and say a stranger once reminded her not to give up. She rarely mentioned the name attached to that stranger. It never felt necessary to her. The lesson mattered far more than the fame behind it. One quiet, rainy evening, far from any cameras or headlines, Shaq drove through a completely different toll booth on a different highway altogether. He watched the striped gate lift smoothly upward right in front of him, rain streaking down his windshield in soft, steady lines. A small, peaceful smile slowly crossed his tired face. He thought about all the booths he had passed through since that foggy night outside Indianapolis. Each one felt like a small, quiet reminder of how far one tiny decision could ripple. He never sought credit for what happened to Nia, and he never spoke about it publicly. Some moments, he believed, mattered more when they stayed quiet and personal, shared only between the two people who lived through them. For years, quiet regret had followed him everywhere, tucked carefully behind his fame and his enormous success. That night, driving alone through the steady rain, he finally felt something settle deep inside his chest. One small act, born from $4.50 on a foggy midnight, had grown into something far bigger. Neither of them could have ever expected it to grow this far. And somewhere along that quiet, rainy drive home, an old, heavy weight finally lifted from his heart for good.